Hey guys, hi everyone. Good evening. Good evening, Pramod. Good evening, Krish. Good evening, Anurag. Good evening, Pradnya. Good evening, guys. Good evening, good evening, good evening. I hope I am audible. Am I able to do essence also? I'm doing audio. Please don't remove. Sure, no issues. Please take care and also make sure that you watch the recordings. Okay. Good evening, Manmohan. Good evening, Ankit. Good evening, Anurag, Himanshi, Doha, Shreyas. Good evening, guys. Good evening. So I can see people are joining. So welcome to our session fourth of our backend, or I guess fifth session. Today's session is going to be a very important session. A reason being because today we are going to create our own APIs. Although we have created to some extent, but today we are going to learn a lot of new things which we have not discussed until now. As we all know that currently we are working on our backend module. So in our backend module, we have already discussed few of the modules, whether it was FS module, HTTP, operating system part. And currently we are in the asynchronous, we are in the Express mod. And we are discussing our Express framework over there of our backend, right? This is what we are discussing currently. Good evening, Said. Good evening, Shobit. Good evening, Akash. Good evening. Good evening. So in today's class, we are going to start with a very small project, okay? And maybe this project you might receive late on in an assignment. So please make sure that you actually stay here up till end and try to understand what is happening. Sir, please give us a project in group 3. I actually am currently very much occupied. That is the reason I have not taken any meeting related to the project groups that we have created. But I'm only here in LPU for next week. And once I will wrap up things from here, I will go home. And after that, we are going to start working on the projects promote. Okay. Good evening, Tante. Good evening, Rushinath. Good evening, guys. Okay, perfect. Great. Now let's pay attention because today's class is going to be 1.5 hour class only. Today's class won't be 2 hours class. So let's directly start this session. Let's not waste our time. I'm going to go and I'm going to create a project. The project name is school. What does school project mean? We will see in a second. Now, instead of opening our VS Code inside Express, let me directly open the school folder over here. Now, I need a little bit help over here. Okay, everyone who has been following these 4 classes, they know what you have to do. I want to use Express, the Express framework. I am not using a core module. I am using a third-party module, which is Express. So the first thing that I will do over here is that whenever we have to use Express, what is the first thing that we do? What is the first thing that we do? Good evening, Roshan. Good evening. What is the first thing? So since we know that we have to install the third-party module, so we need a file. In that particular file, we have to make sure that we will keep all the details related to this folder. So I need npm init-y first, which is I need a file with the name of package.json. And after that, I will install it. So now we can see I have a package.json. In that package.json, there are already some things created. Okay. Now I will simply go at npm i express. Okay. Once I do npm i express, it will install this dependency from the Node.js engine which we have installed using npm node package manager. And once we install, you can clearly see node for package lock.json. Done. Now, what do we need? We need to create a file. In this particular file, I will simply name this file with the name of server.js. I have to create a server. What do I need to do? We need to require it. So whatever we have discussed in the previous class, I am going to do it very quickly because we have already seen this. So I will require my Express server over here inside my application like this. Done. Now, once it's done, what do we need to do? What is the second step? Second step is we will create app. And how do we create app? We will simply create a variable with the name of app, and I will simply tell it, please create an instance of Express application. So it creates an Express application, this particular function. Done. After we create an app, what is the next step? We will make it listen to a port. So I will simply go ask it, hey, please listen to a port called as 8000, and then please execute this particular function while you are simply going to give me a console.log listening to port 4 or 8000 in this case. Done. So we have something like this. So let me try to control X this. since it has not given me any suggestions to control X like this, like this, like this. Done, perfectly fine. So we have created our server. This is what we discussed in our previous class already. Now, in today's project, what are we supposed to do? Let's understand that. And for that, allow me a second only here. I will open my whiteboard because we need to understand few very important things before we move on and write rest of the code. At this point of time, we already know that we have created our server, and the server which I have created is because of the Express framework, and it's listening to a port called as 8000. If I want to create any kind of route over there, what am I going to do? Simply app.get. I can simply tell it, simply create a route on slash, and in this, please execute my function. Whenever anyone accesses this slash route on 8000 port, I simply want to send a response. In this, I have not passed second argument. So let me pass second argument as response. In this response, I want you to send what? Hello, welcome, like this. And now if I go here and try to execute this, so node my server.js, if I try to execute this, it says listening to port 8000. And if I go here and if I refresh my page, open my local host 8000, we can clearly see our output. So we have created our server. This is already what we discussed in the previous class. That's why I'm a little bit fast over here. Now let's start our today's class. Let's try to understand what we are trying to achieve in this case. Okay, please pay close attention, please. In this case, I have a simple requirement. I have a file. So let me copy the data for that file. Allow me 1 second only. So I have a file with the name of initial data.js. Okay, so the file name is initial data.js in which I have some data. Now, what do I want to do with that data? I want to read that data and display it on any route in my application. Okay, that's one thing. Second thing is I want to create some data in it. I want to update some data. I want to delete some data. Let me give you a very simple example over to define and understand the same concept. Let's suppose I have a website, and to that website, I have my front end. And in that front end, I'm simply trying to create an account. Okay, so I have something like this. So I have 3 input fields. In this, we have username. In this, we have email. In this particular thing, we have our password. Now, as soon as I click on over here, sign up, what do you think should happen? We know what will happen from the user perspective as well. We know as soon as I click on the sign up, if my username, email, password I have provided, it should create an account inside the database of the server. Yes or no? It means it should create a new account. That's what should happen over here. But how will it do that? Let's suppose this is my server that I am working on. We know inside the server we will have our database. In that database, we'll simply have our data with which we can perform our operations. Now, when I click on sign up over there, we know it's going to send a request to the server. So a request will be generated from your front end to the server that we have. And inside that request, I will transfer email, password, and my username. And inside that request, it will be accepted by the server, and it will simply execute its logic and try to create it inside the database. But what kind of request, HTTP request, am I going to make over here? I know we have discussed about 4 types of requests. Number 1 was get, number 2 was post, number 3 was put, and number 4 was delete. Now, when we say the request, HTTP request method is get. In this particular case, we simply say our intention is we want to read the data from the database. We want to simply read. We don't want to do anything else. When we talk about post, in this case, we simply mean we want to create the new data in the database. So whatever I will post, create a new data set. Put means that there's already some data, I want to update it. Although you can call it as patch as well, although these are 2 different things, we will see the difference later on. Then when we talk about delete, it means there's already data. Now delete this particular data that we have. So all of these that we have, these are the types of HTTP requests. HTTP requests. So a request is generated, which is HTTP request, and HTTP response is then received, and then we simply tell it what kind of request is this. So is it get, is it post, is it put, is it delete? So whenever our API, actually we implement these kind of methods on it, the API that we create, they are called REST API. What's it called? REST API. So a REST API is that API which simply follows HTTP rules, which simply follows HTTP protocols, and then we implement methods on it. Usually these four: get, post, put, delete. So if we are able to do such thing, we say it's a REST API. Okay. Now moving a little bit forward, let's try to understand one thing. So I have a simple data over here. Let me try to paste it. This is how my data looks like. Okay, allow me a second. So let me copy this and let me try to paste it here. I'm not able to copy it. Why? So allow me a second. So let me copy it manually in that case. So Control C and let me paste this data. So if you look at this particular file, in this case, you can see I have an array which is a student array. Inside this, I have an object. So number one object has ID, name, current class, division. Second object that way it also has name, ID, current class, division, so on and so forth. And how many students data I have right now inside this array? You can see I have 7 students data. Okay, and then I'm simply exporting the student array to my application. Is this clear? So you can see right now I have a simple array, an array of objects in which each object represents one student. What is the ID of student? What is the name of student? What is the current class? What is the division? This is the data that I have. And then there are total 7 students inside this array that I have. And then I'm simply exporting the array, which means I am making it a module. This is called a local module, which I am creating. This is a local module. Do you understand? We discussed 3 modules. Number 1 was core module, already inbuilt in Node.js. Number 2 was third-party modules, which we install. Number 3 is a module which we create and then export and import. So this module that we created, it's a local module. I hope that makes sense. So this is the data. Now I simply want to perform some operations on it. Okay. The first operation is, and right now we are trying to create an API which will actually be able to access data from here, then create, delete, update, and read data. This is what we are trying to achieve. The first thing is we have to simply tell it, whenever I will make a request on slash, which means on localhost 8000, instead of displaying welcome, hello, welcome, I want to display this array. Okay. Now, how do I do that? I have to read the array first. Number 1 is I can simply use fs module. But in that case, it will simply, we have to convert it into a string and we have to take care of a lot of things. We have to think of a lot of things. But what will I do in this case? I will simply make sure, since I have exported it, I have made it a module. I can simply import it. So what I can do is I can simply say var my student array is equals to, I will simply require it from where my dot slash initial data. So since it's a local module, it's a module. I can simply require it how we required our core modules and our third-party modules. That's what exactly I have done. So we all can agree that this particular array right now is inside the file called as server.js. Now in this case, I will simply tell it, instead of displaying my hello welcome, what am I going to do? I will simply ask you to display a students array. Right? Until now, everything is very simple. I'm not doing anything new. Now, if I want to see the change in the output, I have to stop my server and run the server again. So now if I go over here and refresh my page, and if I check my output here, we can clearly see as soon as I refresh my page, we can see our array inside the output. Am I clear until now? Give me a quick confirmation in the chat. Am I clear? Done. So I have an array. And in this case, if you see, the response that it is displaying is in JSON format, JavaScript object notation. In this case, we have keys wrapped in double quotes. So whenever you see a data of this format, where even keys are wrapped in double quotes, we can say this is a JSON array of objects. JSON, JavaScript object notation. It's a data format in which we represent our data so that it will be machine independent. We can use JSON, same type of data inside our Python structures as well, inside any other programming language as well. So this is a very lightweight data structure in which we can represent our data. So over here, look at this. Over here, my array ID is wrapped in double quotes, name is wrapped in double quotes. Similarly, every key is wrapped in double quotes. But if you look at this particular response, do you think ID is wrapped in double quotes? No. So always remember, even though it was an array of object, proper JavaScript data structure, But once I made it a response.send, in that particular case, it converted into a JSON, and in the output, we saw JSON object. I hope that makes sense. Now, moving a little bit forward. Now, what do we want? We simply want one small thing. Okay, now things will get a little bit serious. Okay, and later on we will do same things on our own database. We will create our own database. So things will get a little bit serious. So pay attention. At this point of time, I want to design an API. We know what API is. API is application programming interface. It's an endpoint. Have we discussed API in the last 4 classes, guys? Give me a quick confirmation. If not, then I will discuss first APIs. What API is? Have we discussed what's an API in the last 4 classes? Because in backend we create APIs only. No, let's understand what API is. Okay. So over here, let's talk about quickly what an API is. You might have heard API term too much, in technical field. API simply stands for application programming interface. So it is nothing but actually an interface, which will simply allow me to connect to 2 networks and share data on it. What does that mean? I will tell you a simple example for it. I have given the same example when we discussed APIs in the front end. Same example I will give over here. Let's suppose I am a consumer or I am a candidate. I simply want to, let's say, book flight. Okay, I want to book flight. My intention is I want to travel from one state to another state, and I am trying to book my flight. Now, simply tell me, in order to book a flight, what is the website or application I will use? Simply, I might use. Give me some. Let's suppose I am using Air India, flight. Leave websites aside. I am using Air India, and I am using SpaceJet. These 2 platforms are there. These are what is called airplane companies, and I am simply thinking of I will take Air India plane. On the same time, this is for person A. So person A has decided that I will go and I will have a flight ticket or a flight seat on Air India. Maybe on the same time, instead of having SpaceJet, let's suppose on the same time there's a person B who is trying to book the same Air India flight. Okay, same Air India flight. Now, when I am a user, I will go on any website to book the flight. So you can go on any website on the internet, but we can simply say that this is kind of a user interface that we see, like seating arrangements like this, right? Something like this. This represents the seating arrangement of a flight, and I am simply trying to book a flight ticket of this particular airplane. Done. In this case, of course, since person B is also trying to book the same flight, so the person 2 will also get the same user interface that looks like this. So let me quickly try to make it like this, 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 like this. Now, in this case, maybe person A is trying to book this Air India flight using a website which is called Make My Trip. Make My Trip. And maybe there's some other website. Give me another website where we can book flights. We have a Make My Trip. What's the another one? Let's suppose we have give me something. I don't remember right now other websites with which we can book flights. Give me a website. Make My Trip is one, definitely. One other website quickly in the chat. Paytm. Let's suppose Paytm. Who cares? Let's suppose Paytm. So with the help of Paytm, I want to book the flight. Now, person A being me, I will simply go and I will simply book these flights, which is on Make My Trip. So I am trying to book these 2 tickets. Now I have completed my payment. I did everything. Now you guys tell me one thing. Will person be able to book these 2 tickets now? Will person B be able to book these tickets now? These 2 tickets? Go. Very good. Since this is Make My Trip, this is Paytm. 2 different platforms. Although they are representing same plan, they are representing same ticket. They are representing same architecture over there. So will I be able to book these 2 tickets? Of course not. But how does Paytm got to know that these 2 tickets are booked? How exactly? Is it like Make My Trip and Paytm, they are communicating with respect to each other? No. Make My Trip is a complete different business. Paytm is a complete different business. They're competitors. So they won't share information with respect to each other. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? But how does my Paytm get to know? Because for Make My Trip and for Paytm, there was one common point, which was Air India. Both were representing a flight of Air India, right? Which means Air India has created something in between, maybe a data point, an end point over there, on which whenever this particular thing makes change, those changes are reflected on the data point. Same data point is used by the Paytm, so that if anything changed over, it's updated over here. It also gets reflected on Paytm as well. So there's no connection between Make My Trip and Paytm, but in between there's an interface that Air India has created, where Air India is sharing limited data. Then simply from Make My Trip, I am making a request to data point to just check continuously what is the data related to this particular flight. Similarly, Paytm is later on trying to make requests on the same time. What is the information related to this particular flight? So we have in between an interface, an endpoint, a server over there, a database over there. And for that server, I have simply associated an endpoint over there, an API over here. So whenever Air India has to know any detail, this Air India will make directly request to that, and it will get the information or create the information on it. Similarly, when Paytm has to do the same thing, Paytm will make the same information, sorry, same request on the same endpoint. So it's an interface in between which allows us to connect two businesses together or multiple businesses together. So I hope that's what we mean by API. So APIs hold the data which we are interested in. Now, always remember, it's a limited data. Do you think Paytm has to know who was the customer who actually booked these two tickets? No. Do you think Paytm has to know what was the payment method? No. Paytm in this case has to just to know whether these two tickets are booked or not. So this particular thing shares data to a common point. This particular thing shares the data to the common point. So it's an interface in between on which we put our data so that multiple computers or multiple servers or multiple businesses can connect with each other. I hope API makes sense. Give me a quick confirmation in the chat whether we understood APIs or not. Done. If you understood APIs, we can clearly go on the internet and let me try to find if I have any API. I don't have any API here, but I do have an API on my other browser. So let me simply go and copy this API. See, this is one of the simple APIs, official joke API. It's an endpoint. And me as a user, whenever I will make a GET request on it, it gives me a random joke every single time. So I go to this API, I refresh my page, it will give me every single time a random joke, which means this particular thing has data which I am interested in. So whenever I will make a request to this particular endpoint, it will give me a data, and maybe I might want it to display on my website. So this API, I don't own it. It's someone has created it. And as me as a user, maybe I want some data from this API, which I want to display on the website. So I, being the owner, I will simply make a request on this API, tell it, give me the data. And since it will give me the data, we can simply use it. And that's what we have to go and create here. At this point of time, this is the API. You can see I have built a home API. So anyone making a request on this API, they will get all the data related to all the childrens that exists inside this data entry. But now we have to make it a little bit good looking. So instead of asking it do one thing, instead of asking you to serve on slash, I will simply on search on slash API slash students. Now I have to stop my server, execute it again to see the change. But I think I already showed you a solution of that. What is that module which we use, which automatically triggers the server every single time whenever there's a change? Tell me. What is that module which allows me to trigger a change? We have discussed it in our previous class. Very good. So I will simply go install our nodemon, npmi nodemon. So we will use npmi nodemon over here, and then inside my package.json, inside scripts, I will simply go use another script over there, which is dev. In front of this, I will simply tell it, please execute my server with help of a module called as nodemon. The file name that it has to fire every single time is server.js. So now in the terminal, if I simply go npm run dev like this, click enter, there's an error. It says missing script dev, but I have created a dev script. What's happening? So npm I, is it installed? Dependency, no, it's not installed. Why is that? Okay, it was not working. So fail to save the content if file is newer. Please compare your version. Okay, so this is what I want. I want to make it true. So let me make it true. So dev dependency is there, but I'm not able to see package.json. Why is that? So where is my terminal? It's in the school. So npm I nodemon. Let's see if it works. It should work. Now nodemon is there. Now if I simply say npm run dev, it should work. Perfect, it works. I don't know what the issue was, but it works now. So now if I go to my web applications output, we can clearly see now instead of serving it here, but I have created a better endpoint. So student like this, click enter, it gives me, although it should be students, I guess. Now it gives me data. Perfect. Now after that, please make notes on the same time, because trust me, 80 to 90% of backend development is all this. How we will make display visible on an API, how we will create it, how we will fetch it in a proper way. That is 80 to 90% of backend development. Because don't you think when we talk about backend, it's actually about data flow inside the application, making sure every route is properly working. So please take notes. Now, at this point of time, if I am going on this API called as /API/students, if I make a GET request, it gives me all the data. But now I don't want to do that. I simply want that if I go here and if I write number 1, if I write 1, it should give me first student's data, which means Jayesh, only this data. Similarly, if I go here, write /2, it means it should give me 2 ID students data and so on and so forth, which means now I want to find data on a unique base, something that will return me data individually of a student. Now, do you think in this particular data that I have, there is some parameter that will actually allow me to identify a student uniquely? Very good. We have, what do we have? We have ID. So in this case, the first object, first student can be represented by ID uniquely. So if I say, give me a student whose ID is 2, it will know that I have to print Meenakshi in the output. But now there's one very important point. If you look at this, until now, this particular part of my API is static in nature. By static, I simply mean that it will always be /API/students. You cannot change it. But over here, this particular last parameter, it's called a param, Param. This param is dynamic in nature, which means this can take n number of values. And whatever value it takes, it has to give me the output. You might have seen such kind of behaviors too much on the internet. You simply have page 1. Then if you make it page 2, it gives you page 2 content. If you make it page 3 in the URL, it gives you page 3 content. Similarly, we want this particular parameter of this API a dynamic in value. We know it's not static now. I can write 2 there, I can write 3 there, I can write 4 there. So same parameter I am changing in the API. This is called a dynamic routing. What's it called? Dynamic routing. So the route of this API, there's one parameter in it, or more than one maybe next time, which are dynamic in nature. So what do I need to do? I need to go here and I need to simply create one another route. So app.get. In this case, I will simply say /API/students, then /ID. This is what my param is. Once anyone accesses this, I would simply want to go in the response, please send. What are we going to send? You are simply going to send each student's detail like this. This is what we want. Okay. But if you look at this particular endpoint that I have created, do we all agree in this case, whole parameters are static in nature? Which means if I want to see this output in the output, I must write this particular thing in the URL bar. I cannot write anything else. So let me try to divide my screen into 2 parts. So let me go here and let me divide it like this. See, now in this case, if I go here, if I simply click 2, if I click enter, it says I cannot get this particular route because this route in this application server does not exist. But over here, if I simply go write this to change it with exactly ID, in that case, if I click enter, it says a response. Okay, I have not created a response or request comma response. And now if I refresh my page, we can clearly see it gives me each student detail. So in this case, this ID is also static, which means since I have told it that it's an ID, it has to be ID only. You cannot write anything else. But now I know this part of the API is dynamic in nature. So if there's any parameter which is dynamic in nature, put colon in front of it. It tells the server this is dynamic in nature. And now if I refresh my page and make it ID, it works. If I make it a one, it also works. I can make it now anything, it also works. I can make it even some random string as well, it works. This simply means whenever any user will go inside the URL or anyone will try to make a request on this API, this ID can take anything. It can be a number, it can be a string, it can be anything. This is what dynamicality means. I hope this makes sense. But do we really want to see this particular response in the output? No. What do we want? We simply want that if my ID is 1, in that particular case, display me the student 1 details, Jayesh's details. If the ID is 2, in that particular case, display Minakshi, and so on and so forth. But how can I implement that? There's a simple approach over here, simple approach. Since we want this kind of behavior, what kind of behavior? Based on what this dynamic values is, make a search inside this array. If the ID of that particular object is matching with this param, give me that object. Is this what your logic is? Of course, yes. But don't you think in order to write that logic, we should be able to first of all understand and read what user is typing inside the request.url? I mean, inside this particular route. Give me a yes or no. Give me a yes or no. If we want that we should give me third user's details, the first task that we should be able to do, we should be able to understand what user is typing inside the URL bar. We should be able to somehow read it. And how can we read it? We can simply read it using one simple methodology or a terminology or concept over here. Do we all agree that this, whenever I will click enter, it means I am trying to make a request? Yes. So this particular thing belongs to request object and it belongs to param. So let me simply say let my a is equals to request dot URL. So what am I going to do? URL. Although I don't need URL, I need params. So I will simply go say params. So request dot params like this. Let's see what a becomes. So I'm simply telling inside my request object, whatever params are, these are called params. This is a param. This one. If it's a dynamic value, it's a param. It's called param. Whatever params you have, whenever anyone makes request on this, please return me that and put it in an A. And let me simply go and tell it. After that, please send this A in a response. So now if I refresh my page, we can clearly see it returns an object where ID is equals to 3. So it will take this as the key name and whatever the value is, it will return and put it in 3. So if I go here, let me write 4, click enter, ID becomes 4. If I write over this something else, that becomes my ID. So it means with help of request.parameters, I will be able to read what is the dynamic value inside the URL. Give me a yes now again. Give me a yes. So this request.parameters will return me an object, and that object will contain key, whatever the name of your dynamic param is, and whatever the value you pass over it, that will be the value. So if I write over there 1, it makes me ID is equals to 1. I hope that makes sense. So what will I do? I will now tell it. Since I have found a way, which means if I want to simply get whatever user is typing over there, I will simply tell do one thing. Over here, simply send instead of A. In this A, there's a key called ID. So in this A, there's a key called ID. Give me that. So now if I refresh my page, we can get 1. So whatever I am typing over here inside this, so whatever I am typing inside this, that's exactly what my A.ID is. So A.ID is, that's what my A.ID is. So we have gotten an ID, right? So instead of this, can't I simply do one thing? Hey, do one thing. Please create a variable ID. In the request.parameters, whatever object you get, there's an ID value in it. Does it make any sense? Does it make any sense? Done. Another point. Now, what we have to do, we have to go and we have to Now find an element with this ID inside initial data. But if you look at this ID is a number. This ID is a number. It's not a string. But always remember one thing. It does not matter what you put inside this. My request.parameters will always treat it as a string. So even if I write 1, it is string. If I write 2, it is string. If I write 3, it is string. So even though for a user it looks like a number, but over and for the server will make every param by default as string. So what do we have to do? We have to convert this string into a number. So how do we do that? We can simply go and tell it, please, once you receive this, convert this request.parameter over there into an integer. And how do we do that? We simply use a method called as parse. So parse int. Okay. Now after that, what are we supposed to do? We are simply supposed to do a search. So I will simply tell you do one thing. Let the object and variable is equals on the student array that I have. Please use a method called as find. So we have an array method called as find. I hope everyone knows what find method is. Do we all know what find method is and how it works? Yes or no? If not, then I will show you quickly. Do we know what find is? Hey Mandu, hi, good evening. Do we know what find is? Quickly. If we don't, then in that case, I will show you quickly, very quickly. But let's see what find does. Let's understand it again over here. Okay. It receives a function as an argument. So I will pass a function like this. What are we supposed to do? We are simply supposed to implement few simple logics. We simply want to do one thing in the student array. Please find that object which has an ID 1. So I will simply tell it receive item over here and receive its index. Although I don't need index in this case, I need only item. So find is a looping method. Find is a looping method. So on the student array, it will start a loop. So once it starts a loop, let me try to display that array here. So over here we can see this is the array in my output. So once it will start a loop on this array, it will take one by one these items. So it will take this and place in item variable. Then in second loop, it will take this object, second object over there and place it in item. And similarly, so on and so forth. So item will be in every loop, the individual item of the array. Done. Finally, what do we want? We simply want, please return that item. Please return that item where the item.id is equals to the ID that I am receiving from my request.parameters.id. So whatever ID I will write over here, this one, as soon as I click enter over here, what it will do is it will make request.parameters ID 1. So ID becomes 1. So I am simply telling it over there, in the student array, only return me that element where the item's ID, item is individual object, that item's ID is exactly equals to ID. So can we say object is nothing but that particular element from the array whose ID we are passing in the URL? Give me a quick confirmation in the chat. Quick confirmation. Done. Finally, we got that object. And now what I will do is I will simply tell in the response, please send. What are we going to send? Send the OBJ that you receive. Also, another very important point. Whenever we implement find, let's suppose there are two items whose IDs are 2. It will not return both objects. It will return the first element that matches the query. So find method returns the first element which matches this particular condition. So first item will be returned over there. Now, if I go here, if I click 1, do you see a proper JS over here? Of course. Now, if I go 2, click enter, you can see properly it works. If I go right 3 over there, it properly works. And so on and so forth. If I write 4, it properly works. So now we build an API over here that actually based on one dynamic param gives me unique values in the output. Am I clear? But always remember a few things now. I hope this logic is very simple and clear. But there are few constraints that you always need to keep in mind whenever you deal with such kind of logic. What are those? Do you think whenever any user will go over here, you control it, what user will type? Like I know that according to the data that I have, this last ID is 7. But what if user ended up writing over the 123? Can you stop it? No, of course not. And if I click enter, it does not know what to return now. So there might be a possibility where the ID that I am passing in request.params.id, that ID is element we don't have inside the student array. So what's it going to return? It will return undefined because this does not exist. So in this case, we need to make sure our server is trained for such kind of operation. Yes or no? In this case, we need to make sure the server is properly trained. If there is an ID that is passed inside the URL inside the API for which the ID does not exist. So for this, we will simply say if the OBJ that I have executed when I made a find, if it is equals to undefined, in that particular case, please make sure that you are going to send a response over there with a status. What is the status? Status is 404. This does not exist. 404. 404, we know what 404 means. 404 means it's an HTTP status code, which means not found. So now if I go here and click enter, what does it say? It says not found. This is one constraint. Can anyone tell me what can be the other constraint that we need to keep in our mind whenever we talk about building servers? Whenever we talk about designing an API like this? What can be the other constraint? Tell me quickly. I want to see how we will think. How we think, guys. Come on. Quickly. The other constraint that we have to make sure we properly take care of it. As a developer, you cannot control what user types here. Since it is dynamic in nature, what if user ended up writing alpha here? This logic handles only one thing. If ID is a number, then do this. What if ID is not a number? ID is a string. If it is not a number, should it return anything? It should simply say bad request. The request that you are trying to make, it's bad. Because I am expecting you to type number only. But what if I ended up writing string? Or what if I ended up writing alphanumeric combination? In this case, what should happen over here? It has to tell, in that case, bad request. Because in this case, it should not say not found, because I am following the pattern of passing a string over there. So it should not happen. So what do? We will simply go here and I will simply tell you do one thing. Don't perform this logic. Even don't convert it into a parsing initially. Simply execute a logic over it, which is if my isNaN. IsNaN is a function. For example, I will pass over here 3. Is 3 not a number? Is 3 not a number, or is 3 a number? It is a number. So this will return false. So isNaN is a function inside JavaScript. We simply will return true if the argument is anything other than number. But if the argument is number, in that particular case, what we will do is we will simply get a proper what is called execution over there, since if condition will be true. Am I clear? So what is isNaN? isNaN is a function. It will simply check whether this argument is a number or not. And isNaN stands for is not any number, but 3 is number. So it means this condition will be false. So what I will do is I will pass ID to it as an argument. Okay, like this. If ID is not a number, in that particular case, please return response.send status. And in this case, I will simply send 400, means bad request. If it is not a number, which means if I write over there this something like this and click enter, now it is bad request because it is a number. It is not a number, I mean, right? Else means now it is a number. In that particular case, I would want it to perform this logic. But make sure you convert the ID first, update the ID with parse int of ID. Is this clear? Is this clear? Am I clear? So now our backend logic is a little bit concrete. We have made sure whatever the constraints there were, we have taken care of it. If ID is not a number, in that case, a bad request. If it is a number, then in that case, find that object. Then maybe there's a reason that ID does not exist. In that case, give me 404, not found. Otherwise, return me that object. Now, if I go here, write 1, it properly works. If I write over the, let's say 7, it also works. But if I write any other number which does not exist, it says not found. But if I end up writing something like this is not a number. In that case, it says it's a bad request. I hope this makes sense. So we developed an API which actually is able to perform a search, a GET request. Now, second, what if at this point of time there are only 7 students? I have to create 8 students. I have to create 9 students. I have to create 10 students. So what am I going to do? Now listen to me very carefully. Very carefully. For that, we know one thing, that we will tell it on the same app, please make a post request. On what? On this /API /students. Then comma, please execute request comma response like this, like this, like this, like this, like this. Where at this point of time, I will simply tell response.send. I will simply say posted successfully. Done like this. Now, if you look at the logic that we have, what is the endpoint that we have? It is /API /students. On the same time, if you look at this particular endpoint, it's also /API /students. So can we create an endpoint and then make 2 requests on it? The answer is yes. But if the request type is different. So if I make a GET request, then in that case, this will happen. If I make on the same endpoint post request, then this will happen. So if I go here, in this case, if I simply say API /students, click enter, it gives me all the data. Why? Because we know if we talk about browsers, by default, whenever we make a request on that particular API, it is nothing but actually a GET request. So since I am performing a GET request, it will display me student ID. Now the real question that we have over here is, will I be able to make a post request once I type my URL in the URL bar? The answer is no. Browsers in the URL actually perform GET request always. So how do we make a post request? We make post request using front end. We have over there form. With help of form, we can make, or with help of function call, we can make. But since I don't have my front end with help of which I can test this API, we can use tools to test our API. One of the very simple tools is we can use Postman. So I can simply install a software, and that software is called Postman. So definitely go there and install your Postman if you want. Like if your laptop is very good, it has very good memory, RAM, and all of those things, then install Postman directly. But let's suppose maybe you don't have that good of a laptop. In that case, simply go to extension. And in this extension, simply install one of the extensions called Thunder. So once you install this Thunder client, with help of this Thunder client, you will be able to make any kind of request on any endpoint. So once you install this, over here, you can clearly see I have now Thunder somewhere, this one. So if I open my Thunder client, it says new request because I am trying to make a new request. So I will simply go and click on new request. In this case, it's telling me the link on which I am trying to make a request. So what is the link on which I am trying to make a request? This is the link. So I will simply go paste this link over here. So once I paste this link over here, right now I am trying to make a GET request on. So if I try to send a response, we can clearly see we have our data. So we have the GET request over here as well. So once I made a GET request on it, you can clearly see it gives me the same data. Since my server is running, that's why it's working. But now what if I want to make a post request or any other request? So in that case, I will simply go and write options, select option, which is called post. So once I click on post over there, and if I click on send response, what does it say? Posted successfully on the same endpoint. Now the method, HTTP method only changed. It gave me a complete different response. So this is Thunder client with help of which in the same VS Code, very small extension, you can test your APIs and you can perform any kind of method on it, whether it's put, post, put, delete, patch, head, and so on and so forth. Now, if you are using Postman, you can simply go over it, ask it, hey, please make a new HTTP request. So I will simply go tell it, do one thing. Create, although let's not create a new, let me use it same here. So I will simply paste it. On this, if I make a send request in the Postman, we should be able to see our data properly working. Let's wait. Ignore all of this, whatever it is, these APIs. Is my server running? Let me try to see if server is running. Server is properly running. So Postman should properly work. Why is it not working? So you can install Postman. I would suggest you only to install Postman if you have good memory. And if you have good RAM. If you don't have it, in the VS Code, simply go to extensions and install Thunder client. And it will give you the same layout. You can see headers, auth, body, tests, pre-run, and then we get response over. Similarly, over we have auth, headers, body, scripts, test setting. But Postman is specifically created, and there are a lot of other advantages which we will see eventually moving forward. But at this point of time, I'm going to use Thunder Client because I don't want to use Postman. I want to make you comfortable in Thunder Client on. Now pay attention. Over here, I have simply performed a post request. And according to the logic that I have, I am saying whenever anyone will make post request, please in this response send this. But is this what we want? No. We want to create new data in the array which I have here. So in this, we want to create new data. So what is it that we are trying to create? We are simply trying to create few things. I will simply tell you do one thing. Okay. Whenever I will make a post request on this, I will simply ask you to create 3 or 4 things. At this point of time, I will simply say let my ID is equals to 8. Number 1. Then let my name is equals to Adhar. Similarly, let my third one, what was the third one? If I go here, third one is current class and fourth one is division. So let my current class over there is equals to, let's say 8. Is it a string? Okay, it's a string. Done. And finally, another variable is let my division over here is equals to, let's say 8. So I have 4 variables over here. And in these 4 variables, I simply am trying to store some data. A data of exact same format, ID, name, current class, division. So now it is a single object. I am simply trying to create 4 different key value, 4 different variables. This is not what we want. So what we would want is, we would simply tell it now, since I have created 4 variables in my student array, how do we add the item at the end of an array? We use push method. Please push. What push an object? Where the name key will be the name variable, comma, the, first one is ID. So let me simply go say ID is equals to the ID, comma, name is equals to name. And then I will simply have current class is equals to current class. And then I will simply have my division over here is equals to division. Like this is the basic way of posting data. That I am telling it in this create 4 variables. In that 4 variables store the data, and then over a student array dot push ID with ID variable, name with name variable, current class with current, division with division, so on and so forth. And once you push, instead of displaying this in the response, I would want to display student array. Okay, simple. Now let me go to Thunder Client and let's see what's happening here. So if I send the response, we can see it gave me the student array in the response, and we can clearly see there's one other item added over there with the same keys. So ID, name, current class, division. Done. But will this change happen in initial data.js? What do you think? Before I go there, what do you think? Do you think this change will happen in the initial data.js? Yes or no? What do you think? This change? Roshan says yes. Okay. Do we think that this change is going to happen to initial data.js? Quickly, I can see only few responses in the chat. Everyone replied. The answer is no. It won't. Now you will tell me, sir, why? Because I am telling it on the same student array, please push, right? So in the initial data.js, you cannot see that data being inserted over here. The reason is very simple. Because I am simply creating this module. Then I am simply importing the module, not the same file exactly. For example, what do I mean by that? Over here, I am simply requiring Express. Now, if I try to add something in the Express, do you think that will add changes, post change to the Express third-party module that we have? No. It's an instance of it. Similarly, this student array is an instance of it. I can require the same initial data array everywhere in a lot of files. So if I make changes over in this particular domain, in that particular case, the changes will be reflected only this particular student array, which is available here in the instance. But if I go and make now changes over here and then export it, then the change will reflect. I hope that answers your question. Okay, moving a little bit forward. Now, this is basic way, right? Who will create it like that? Of course, no one. No one is going to create it like this. Let's suppose now my intention is I want to add another student. What will I do? Will I write now ID is equals to 9, name is equals to Ankit, and then the current class, this and division, and again push? No. Because right now, if you go and whenever you make a post request, every single time it's adding the same item, adding the same item, adding the same item. Why? Because the logic in the server for the post request is fixed. It is fixed. It's always that. It's always 8. It's always 8. So this is not how it's going to work. Then what do we do? From the front end, we send the data, which will be received by the server, and that's what we post. For example, in sign up page, whatever we will type in the input field of front end, that's what we want to be inserted in the database. So it means we will receive that from the front end. This is what we mean. And this is the most important point of today's class. Today's class, this is what you need to take with you. So I have a web page, and that web page is for sign up. So I have input field for email. I have an input field for password. Okay, and I have a button that's for sign up. Now, me as a user, I will type my email here. I will type my password. Now, over here, when I click on sign up, what is it supposed to do? In the backend, there's a server, and within that server, we have a database, and in that database, we want this data to be inserted. Let's suppose my email that I have typed is it's adfar@gmail.com. Password is 1234. Now, how does my server get to know that in the database I have to insert adfar@gmail.com and password is equal to 1234? Because I'm doing it in front end. Server is located on some other domain, some other IP address. How does it get to know this is the data that I have received? Because this is how it gets to know it. When I click on sign up, I generate a request. So for me, it's a simple request. But internally, using this request, I hide it or I send my data as a secret inside it. So inside this request object, I write my code in front end in a way so that when this request will be received by the server will be able to extract the data. Okay. Server should be able to receive the data using the same request, and from the same request, server should be able to extract the data. And it is received inside a key of request called as request.body. What's it called? Request.body. And we will later on see how it's transferred in the body. But right now, trust me, we simply say that whenever we will send the data, it will be received inside a key of request called as body. So what we will do is we'll simply imagine, not imagine, but we will assume that the data that I'm going to receive, this data will be received by the body, request.body. So let me simply say, let my data over is equals to request.body. Okay. And I simply want to tell it, now don't push it like this. Simply tell it response.student, I want to send the response data, what I am receiving from request.body. Okay. So I am right now imagining that there is an object key body inside the request object. I'm simply telling it whatever is inside this, put it in a variable called data and send me this particular data over here in the response whenever anyone makes a request to this. But now, if we talk about request.body, and if I talk about this logic, I have front end where I will type it. I have front end where I will type it, and then that will be sent to the backend inside request.body. But over here, I don't have front end. But if you look at this 100 line, you can clearly see there is one key from the request called as body. And you will simply tell, I am transferring few things. What? Number one is I am transferring name. So name is supposed to be adfar, then comma. Another one is my current class, like this. Like this. Current class is, let's suppose 10. Then comma, my division. So I will make it as a JSON data. You can see I have selected JSON over here. And then inside this, I will simply make division is equals to 10. Will I write ID guys over here? ID is equal to 8? No. I will write a logic in a way so that it will check whatever the current length of array is. Please add ID, check its length, and add 1 to that every single time whenever I make a post request. So now let's see in the body inside my request, whenever I will make a post request, I am sending a body from my request with the request. So when I click on send, this request.body will be sent to my server over here as well inside this request object. And I'm simply telling it, put it in a variable called as data. But now if I go here and if I click on send, we should be able to see our Express over here. What does it say? It says, so if I make a post request, let me send a post request, we are not able to see a response. Why is that? So let me go to the, although I'm already in VS Code, so it's still listening. Why is it not giving me the response over here? Let me do one other thing. Let me simply say console.log my data. Let's see what it prints in the console. Now, if I go here and if I make a request to the same API with a post and let me try to send a request, it gives me undefined. What does it give me? Undefined. Even though inside my request object, I actually transferred my body and I try to read that over here in a variable called as data and I'm consoling it. But it says undefined because there is a function which we are missing. Now, server should be able to extract the data. See, over here, it's a JSON object. So it's a JSON object. And over here, will be able to store it in a JavaScript object. So I am sending it as a JSON object and I am trying to receive it in a JavaScript object. But these are two different data types. So we must use a method which will actually parse my JavaScript object notation, this JSON object, this particular type of object, into this JavaScript object. So we have to tell it from the body, you will receive a data, convert properly in JavaScript. So we have to parse it. And for that, inside our server, we will simply use a method. So I will simply say app.use. Use what? Express.json. So it's a middleware which we use. And I think we already discussed middlewares in the last class. If we did not, we will discuss middlewares later on. But we will use this method express.json. It means whatever you will receive from request.body, whatever, convert and properly parse it into a proper data type, which I'm looking in this case objects. It was not able to properly understand the data. It was receiving the data, but was not able to understand. That's why it gave undefined. But once I implement this particular logic, I have to properly parse it. So now if I go here and if I try to make a request, so if I try to make a request, now we can clearly see our object. And not only that, even in the response over here as well, we should be able to see our object. Done. So are we able to extract our data from request.body, guys? Are we able to do that? Give me a quick confirmation. Everyone understood this? That whenever we will receive any data from the body and from the front end, we have to use a middleware over there which will be able to properly parse it, called as app.use express.json. So in front of this, please write a note that we will use it to parse data from the request.body. Now, if imagine I have a front end as well. So somehow I have to figure out how to transfer email and password inside this request.body. And how do we do that? You will see that later on. We use fetch method or XCS for the same. I hope this makes sense. Am I clear? Done. Moving a little bit forward. Now we are supposed to make sure that this particular data is posted. So now we do have data. We do have data with every request I am sending the data. I will simply tell you, do one thing. In my student array, please implement a push method. And over here, you will simply make ID. But what should be the ID inside the object? ID should be my student array dot length, then plus plus. This is what it should be. So let me do one thing. Let me go here and let me create a variable. So I will simply say, let my current ID is equals to the student array that I have. From it, please return length. And right now, what will be this variable according to this data? There are 7 items. So it will be 7. Done. So since it's 7, now I will simply tell it, do one thing. ID, make it current ID plus plus. Or instead of doing it separately, I will simply tell do one thing. Over here, whenever anyone makes a request over there, initially, as soon as we make a request to make it current ID. Done, simple. And then over here, once it's done, make ID is equal to current ID. This is number one thing. So ID should be equal to the current ID like this. So let me remove plus plus here. Plus plus. Then second thing is, what is second thing? Second is name. So can we say name is equal to data.name? Then third one is my current class. So I will simply go tell it. Third one is current class like this. Is equals to what? My data.current class like this. And then third one over there, division. So whatever I receive in data.division. So I have actually told it in the array, please push this data. Am I clear? Do we understand properly? Done. And finally, I will tell it in the response. Please send. What are we going to send? Send the student array that we have. Now, in this case, if I go, I have properly passed ID, I have properly passed name, current class, and division. Let's go to the new request. Since I have passed the data, I will make a send request. Once I send it, we can clearly see ID is right of 7 over here. Why it's 7? We will see that, but we are able to see alpha 10 this. Let me change name. Let's suppose name right now is Jalak. Okay, so another one we have Jalak. Current class for Jalak is let's suppose 5. Division over here is not actually 10 but A. So now if I click on send, we can clearly see every single time it's actually making my what is this called ID over there is equals to 7 only. Do we want 7? Do we want 7? No, we wanted 8, then 10, 9, then 10, then 11, then 12, and so on and so forth. Now let's see why it's happening over here. So we are defining a variable called as length. Let me do one thing. Let me simply say console.log my current ID. So in this case, let me make a request to this. So if I send it, let me see what is the current length inside the server. So inside this, it is giving me 7, which is correct. Then over here inside this request, I am trying to make it. Okay, I have not implemented plus here. Sorry. So it should be current ID plus. Done. So let me stop my server now. Let me try to execute my server again. So let me run the server again. Done. Now if I go here, send this. So we can clearly see ID is 8 Jalak. If I send it again, ID is 9 and same name over here. I hope this makes sense. So this is how we will create our data. Now we have to make sure that we will be able to perform same operations on the real database, which we will do in our tomorrow's class. Yes, in order to stop the server in the terminal, we have to use Control-C. Now pay close attention. At this point of time, if you look at this, server logic for post, the logic is very simple. Is it very simple? The answer is yes. But don't you think we have to keep some constraints in our mind? There should be some constraints for the API. If anyone makes a post request, it should make sure all the constraints are properly implemented. What are those? What are those? What do you think? What can be the first constraint? First constraint can be, and always remember, API follows few rules. What are those rules? Let me tell you very simple. If you look at this data, don't you think every object has same format, which is ID, name, current class, division? Every object has 4 keys: ID, name, current class, division, ID, name, current class, division, ID, name, current class, division, so on and so forth. But what if I simply shared only name from the front end and division only? In that case, if I send a request, you can clearly see the last one has only 3 keys. So format is disturbed. This should not happen. This should not happen. So whenever we create an API, data format should be across all the instances. This is called schema. Schema has to be followed, a proper format. Right now, even if I remove this division as well, if I try to send a request, we can clearly see it. Actually, let me remove this over here. Let me try to send a request. Now it properly works and there's only 1 key. Should it happen? No. It should not. So what is the condition which we are trying to implement? What is the condition which we are trying to implement? There's one condition which we have to see. That whenever anyone from the front end will make a post request on this to create new data, it must contain all the keys. It must contain name, it must contain current class, it must contain division. If and only if there are all 3 keys available in the request.body, then only implement the post. Is this the condition which we are looking for? Is this the constraint which we are looking for? Yes or no? Right? So what do we need to do? We need to check whether these 3 keys are there or not. And even if one is missing, don't push. Give me an error which will be bad request. Make sure all of these 3 keys are available. So we will make sure that this whole logic, pushing logic over here, is only happening when all of these 3 keys are available. So how do we do that? So let me simply remove this push logic first of all. What I will do is I will simply let me remove these both lines of code over here, because current ID plus plus should also happen only if the all keys are available. We have to do that. Yes, we have to do that. We will do that again. Tomorrow, hopefully, we will see MongoDB and Mongoose. Don't worry about it. Same thing we will do related to our real database. We'll have our own real database. Now, in this case, I will simply implement if condition. I will simply tell it, inside this data, please try to find. Please see inside this data whether it contains the key which is name or not. If it contains in that particular case, well and good. Then add and check if the data contains email, this current class and not. Then add and if it contains division or not. So how do we do that? Please find. Now we have seen since how we can implement our find method. Okay, there's one mistake that I'm doing. Can anyone figure out what's the mistake that I'm doing? Quickly figure out. Quickly figure out. And let me give a hint. The error is over here in this particular line. Tell me what's the error. Quickly. What is the error? Think about it and tell me. In this case, if you look at this line of code, this particular thing, there is an error. Data.find. It is wrong. I cannot implement find. Tell me why. There's an error only because, please note it down. Find is a method which can be implemented only on arrays. But is my data array? Is my data array? No, data is not array. So what is my data? It's an object. And on object, we cannot implement find method. But do we have any method? Do we have any method which actually converts my object keys into an array? Because what we want to do is we want to see whether there's a key name, whether there's a key current class, whether there's a key division. So I simply want to implement a method on this object which will simply create array of it, but only of keys. So it should have array of name, comma, current class, comma, division. So what am I going to do? We have a method of objects. Very good, Roshan. So I will simply tell it, let my keys is equals to use a method called object dot keys over there. Okay. And then I will simply pass my data as an argument. If you don't understand what it does, so let me simply say keys, let me console it. So I will simply console. Okay. Now let me remove this for a second. So I'm creating a data. I'm reading my data from request.body. Then I am creating another variable object.keys data. Let me go here and let me try to make a send request. Once I make a send request, let me open the console. If I open the console, what do we have? We have an array. Array of name, array of current class, array of division. So we simply have a method called object.keys. Whatever object you pass, whatever keys it contains, it will create array of those keys, as you can see here. Now, my logic is very simple. I can implement now any method to find whether in this keys array, do we have current class, do we have name, do we have this. So if my keys dot include, I think includes is a method. Yes, it does it include my name, then add and check another condition. Does it contain over there what is called keys dot include? Does it contain over there what? Another one is current class. And then over here another add and please check whether this key is over there include. Does it include over there what? Include division. If it includes all of them, if all of these three conditions are true, then only in that case please perform the fetch method. We somehow lost that. So let me implement current ID plus plus and then please go and tell it on my student array, please push. Then what is it going to push? It's going to push an object where ID will be simply what? My current ID, then comma, the name will be what? Data dot name, and then my current class will be what? So current class over there will be simply is equals to data dot current class like this. So data dot current class like this, and then comma over here, we will simply have my division. In this case, division is equals to my data dot division. So only then only do the push. And once it's done, please perform this. Else, go there and please tell it to return. What's it going to return? Return response dot send over their status. And that send status is 400, which means bad request. right? So I hope this makes complete sense over here. So we can clearly see that I'm simply telling it if my keys include name, if the keys include current class, and keys include division. In that particular case, increase my current ID and then push. And then over here, else do this. Although we can implement this now here. So if this is true in that particular case, return my this logic. So sorry, let me do control. So let me remove this, control X, and let me put it here. Done. I hope this makes sense. Am I clear, guys? Do we understand this logic? Do we understand this constraint? Give me a quick confirmation in the chat. Am I clear? If it contains this, then what does and mean, by the way? And mean? Yes, we will not do that. Okay. We can use even find method as well, or we can use any other methods. Right now, we are just starting from very basics. Of course, it's not optimal, and we are not going to look for keys like this. There are a lot of other methods which we can implement. We can use find method, a better method, which will return the first index it matches to. We can do that as well. Give me 2 minutes. I will show you that as well. Even I'm not sure whether this will work or not, but let's see. So now if I go here and if I click on send, once I click on send, we can clearly see it creates the item. But what if I remove the current class? If I remove this, we can clearly see it says bad request, because there's one key which is missing. Since there's one key missing, we can clearly see it's bad request. If I go here, put it back, click a send request, now we can see there's one another item added, add the 9th ID, which is Janak. Now, what Roshan is trying to tell you, Roshan is saying that when we talk about includes method, it has to perform the search on each item. So if there are 10 keys, it will try to perform a linear search over there, which is not efficient or optimal over here. So it should simply see and return. If it matches, it should not perform the rest of the loop. That's what Roshan says. Nadeem, if it and means if both are true. So figure out a better method over there. What can be the better method, by the way? Do we have anyone who can tell me a better method? Before joining this batch, I was lost and unsure about what to do, but ever since I met Advars YouTube channel, everything feels clear and now perfect. Glad I helped Adil. We can use find method. How? We can simply remove this. Let me not remove it. Let me simply try to comment it. Okay. So what I will do is I will simply go here. Let me try to comment it, because I maybe later on even try to find this code. I will simply implement the same logic over here. So let me copy this, Control C, and let me implement the same logic here. And in this particular logic, I will use another method called as find. In the same array, implement a find. But with this find, what I will do is I will pass callback as an argument, while it will simply do a loop on the array, while individually it will take item, and I will simply tell it return. What's it going to return? Check if the item is equals to name, like this. Although I don't need to return now. So simply return item is equals to name. And now in this similar way, I will implement keys.find everywhere. Although I can tell you one thing, there are a lot of students who will see over here what's happening. Ignore it. Ignore this find method for this case. Ignore this, because I think you can completely understand what includes mean, right? So this I will remove from here, and I will also go here and put it where my item is equals to division. So it simply means please return true. So if this is true, it will be only true if there's item with name. This will be only true if the item is current class. This will be only true if the item is division. So if there is name, there is current class, there is division, in that particular case, all of the if will be true. So now if I go here, if I try to make a send request, we can clearly see 8th item got created. But what if I will remove this? So if I remove this, try to make a send request, it says bad request. It's again similar logic. I hope this makes complete sense. Am I clear with post? Am I clear with post? Give me a quick confirmation in the chat. Quick confirmation. Quickly. Done, everyone? So is there anyone who is facing some issues with this? I think this should be very clear, right? This should be very clear. Now, there are two more things that we are supposed to do, put and delete. But unfortunately, as we all know, today's class is only 1.5 hours. So we cannot discuss put. If I start discussing it, it might take 10-20 minutes at least. Okay, more than that maybe, to understand the logic, right? That's why we will discuss put and delete in our tomorrow's class. But I will still, since we have 10 minutes, please make sure that you go and try to learn something related to MongoDB. See, when we say this kind of structure in which we are trying to perform 4 operations: create data, read data, update delete data. It means we are trying to deal with the data. But once we say we are trying to deal with data, it means we must have a storage in which we can store our data so that we can perform all the CRUD operations. But do you think you will have your data like this in a file called initial data.js? No, we cannot post data to it because it will be already in only one instance. It will always contain 7 keys. Every single time, whenever we will create and run the server, it will always have initially this. So we cannot use this kind of structure. So we need a proper storage in which changes will actually happen. And for that, the database in our web development, which we use in MERN stack, is called MongoDB. So MongoDB is a database which is NoSQL database. Let me tell you what does that mean. There are 2 databases that we have. One is called SQL databases, SQL databases. Another one is called NoSQL databases. So MongoDB is a NoSQL database. What does that mean? What is a database in which we can store data in a proper format, whatever the format this database is using. There's a proper rules that this data structure might follow, and so on and so forth. You all might have, I'm pretty much sure, all of you, most of you at least, you know what SQL is. So let me simply create and find SQL tables. If I go to images, the simplest way of storing our data is in shape of tables, where we have a top row, which will simply contain attributes. And then these are called rows, tuples, if I remember correctly. In SQL, these are called tuples. So first row is the first tuple, then second tuple, then third tuple, then fourth tuple. So this is called SQL representation, in which the database is following a relational model. One table is related to another table is related to another table, and you can find a query. For example, you have to create a database for university. So how many tables can you create? One for department, one for employees, one for students, one for maybe library books, and so on and so forth, right? Now, once you have to see these employees are working in which department. So you have to connect 2 tables. So there must be a relationship that might connect to them. Such kind of format or structure is called relational database models. Okay, hopefully we will see. I'm not sure, Nadeem, honestly for that, but definitely, if possible, we can definitely discuss all these things. Okay. So what do we have? We have relational database in which entities are related to each other. Departments are related to employees. What if I want to? I might have a table for salary. Now, of course, in that particular case, when we say there's a salary, it must be connected with an employee. Employee is a separate table, salary is a separate table. So there must be a link which might connect to them. So these are called a relational database model. But on the same time, when we talk about MongoDB, MongoDB is a non-relational database model. Okay. Another very important thing is the difference between SQL and MongoDB. If you look at this, there are 5 attributes over here: roll number, name, address, phone, age. Now, whatever data I will enter, don't you think it has to follow the same format? It must contain these 5 keys over there. Can I tell it in the 6th row, add gender as well? Can we do that? If the structure of table is created, can we add inside the 6th row gender? We cannot. So when we say we have an SQL database, it has to follow a proper schema. Schema means proper structure. But on the same time, MongoDB is schema-less. So MongoDB does not follow any schema. Although our requirement is that it must follow schema, but when we talk about MongoDB database, it does not follow any schema. It does not. So we can store in first document, we can store with 4 key value pairs. Second document can be with 10 key value pairs. Third can be with only 1. And there won't be any errors or issues that we have. But in SQL, if we are creating this table, once we define the table structure, in the same table structure, whatever our rules are, we have to implement it in that way on. So those are called schema implemented databases. Another thing, over here, we represent our data like this in a table format. But if we talk about our MongoDB supports data like this as an array of objects, as an object, JSON data. So we have JSON data structure. That's how we store our data in the MongoDB. So later on, when I have to create a structure, if I have to store one entity, one tuple over there, I will not tell it insert this row, but I will tell it insert this object inside the MongoDB, which we will see in our tomorrow's class. Tomorrow's class, we are going to start our MongoDB, and tomorrow's class, we are going to actually connect our server with the database. And once we do that, we learn a few very important concepts of it, and then we will create our own front end and make the entire MERN application. It's very easy. Backend is the most easiest thing only if your JavaScript is strong, basics are strong. Because see, when we talk about this, if you don't know what find method will do, it might create some problems. If you don't know what push method will do, it might create some problems. If you don't know what plus plus operator means, it might create some problems, right? So we must have all of these things. You must know what dot means. You must know what this method means. Although I'm every time explaining everything I'm explaining, every bit of it, but still you should have a little bit of understanding. So go on the same playlist where I'm adding these lectures. Go there and follow the JavaScript playlist. You will enjoy it, trust me, and you will learn the web development. ठीक है ना? Am I clear? Do we have any questions for today's class? Tomorrow we will see put first, then delete, and then finally we will start MongoDB and connect, perform the same operations on the MongoDB, the database that we have. Okay, give me the feedback, and please, I request all of you, please and please make sure you put a comment. You don't do that. Please, once the class ends, put a comment. Put a comment. Okay, put a comment, proper comment that I deserve at least. Address link, allow me a second. So let me share the address link. So please submit this. And on Monday, I will launch the assignment as well. So I guess you have received the address link. Please mark your address. Tomorrow we will connect on our same time, which is at 6 to 8. Tomorrow we will have 2 hours of class, even maybe 3 hours of class. We will try to do all of these same things, CRUD operation on the database. So whatever we will have tomorrow, a very effective and very valuable class. So make sure you join tomorrow's session. Thank you so much, guys. Bye, everyone. Good night. See you in the next class. Bye. Good night. Good night, everyone. Good night. Good night, everyone. Good night.